Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now, I'm really excited to get today's guest on here because I've been a big fan of IFTTT for many years now, because Linden Tibbets is the founder and CEO of the online platform that is empowering users to do more with their favourite apps and smart devices by helping them automate and integrate so they work together seamlessly. They have over 700 apps, services and devices, including the world's biggest brands like Google, Discord, Slack, Dropbox, Alexa and Fitbit, and millions of users that rely on IFTTT for their most important integrations. And there are so many of them, and if you've not heard of them before, I urge you to check out the website immediately, because you can automate just about anything you can think of, from reminders such as put on sunscreen when the UV index is high, to notifications on your phone letting your spouse know that you've left work and are heading home, all automatically. And from that to tapping into the Internet of Things, to turning on your lights as soon as you unlock the front door. Basically, it makes it easy for any of us to control and customize our world. And to date, they've raised over $62 million from investors including Salesforce and IBM, and their users perform over 1 billion automations and integrations every single month. But I want to learn more about the story behind the company, how they launched the platform in 2010, and what put him on this path. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to the US so we can speak with Linden, who's going to share his story with us all today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Linden. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Linden Tibbets, founder and CEO of a company called IFTTT, IFTTT. It's got 3 T's, so how you pronounce it is, we're flexible on that. But we say IFTTT, stands for if this then that. We've been around for, I kind of make a joke on how long we've been working on it. I've rounded up to 10 years for like 2 or 3 years. So now I think I'm rounding down to 10 years. So I just say 10 years, some give or take plus or minus 2 years. But we launched, I think, December 2010. So that's, if you're doing the math, it's almost 12, I think. And we help people make simple connections between, hundreds, if not thousands of different types of devices, services that all fit the format. If something happens, then do something else. So if, the delivery driver rings your connect the doorbell, then blink the lights in the home. Or if you're mentioned on Twitter, then save that tweet, an image of the picture of the person, the profile picture, to a spreadsheet or to Dropbox. So you make simple little automations, what we call applets. And we've had almost 25 million, almost 26 million folks sign up and try it over the years. And we've just shifted gears to an entirely different business model about 2 or 3 years ago. And I think, we're like I said, 12 years in, but kind of feels like we're still just getting started.
Yeah, and I'm one of those 26 million over the last few years. One of my favorite little recipes, I think it was, that I created was as soon as I Shazam a song that I like somewhere, not only will it tell me what it is, but it automatically puts it into a Spotify playlist. Little things like that make little victories in life. But God, I'd love to take you back in time. Now, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that would put you on this path?
I've kind of had the same kind of talk track to my background for a long time. It always involves knowing at a really young age, 12, 13, 14, that I wanted to be doing computer things in Silicon Valley. And it sounds almost ridiculous because dating myself now, I just turned 40 years old. So that was quite some time ago. And I think really the real inspiration was video games, Pixar. I was really into doing my own little 3D animations. I knew Pixar was out here in the Bay Area. So when it came time to kind of look at schools and where to go, I pretty much only looked at schools in the Bay Area. I wasn't a good enough basketball player to go to Stanford. That was like my number one. And, kind of knock on wood, I think it worked out. But I went to a school called Santa Clara instead in San Jose. And right from the get-go, did computer engineering. And I think I had the dean of the computer engineering school tell me that there was no way I was going to graduate and do computer engineering and basketball at the same time. And he was kind of right about that. So I was much better with computers than I was at basketball. So funny thing happens when you get over, I guess you're in the UK, so 2 meters, I'm about 6'9" everybody thinks you're going to be good at basketball. I guess for
Yeah.
good reason. But yeah, I kind of use that as an excuse to get out here to do computer stuff. So just a big, tall nerd.
Oh, I love it. And that's exactly what you're doing. And that path would lead you to IFT, which stands for if this, then that, as you said there. But I'd love to hear more about the story behind the company and the problems you set out to solve with technology, because it feels in many ways that you found, or you wanted to create something with automations before automation was even a thing for the most part. Was it little frustrations that just got you going and inspired it, or what was the story behind it?
Yeah, there were kind of a handful of different factors that led to, it was kind of like an aha moment, inspiration. I kind of tell that story a couple different ways, but was waiting in line for food, and just like it was the name that came in, if this then that. Oh, I should check if that domain's available. Buy that domain. And so like the concept was kind of fully baked from the get-go. How you actually execute on that concept and even turn that into a business, that only took about a decade. But the idea of if this and that really just kind of popped in my head, and the factors that led to that kind of sudden inspiration. One of those was, so I was doing a job as an engineer at a design firm called IDEO, and I had kind of long personal story there, but I kind of desperately wanted to be a designer. And so figured I could get a job as an engineer at a design firm and kind of learn by osmosis. And a lot of what I was doing is, I think there was only a company about 500 people. I think there was probably 2 or 3 software engineers, the whole company, was basically just like connecting the dots between internal kind of boring enterprisey systems, LDAP and different things that they had put together over the years. And so a lot of my actual work was basically just like duct taping stuff. And, and I think that kind of crossed over with this other very similar idea. So there was a woman at IDEO named Jane Fulton Surrey, and she was, I think well known, back in the 80s and 90s for really kind of, I think, coming up with this whole idea of human factors, or thinking about design from the kind of human perspective. Like, let's not design objects. Let's start with what people are trying to do and the problems they're trying to solve, and then try to, kind of evolve an object or a system from there. And that all sounds really obvious and silly, because I think that's kind of where the design world has shifted. But she was a big part of that. And she wasn't even a designer. She was a psychologist, so professor there at Stanford. And she had this book called Thoughtless Acts. And really what it was kind of just like a picture book. And they were pictures of people kind of reusing some type of tool or object outside of the scope of what the original, kind of inventor of that object would have used it for, or would have thought someone would use it for. So silly examples are like using a hammer to hold open a door, kind of jamming the back part of the hammer behind a door, or, like ashing your cigarette in the top of a beer bottle top, or like using a pencil to pull your hair back if you've got long hair. Those are all, little inventions, basically little modifications that people do all day, every day. We kind of take it for granted in the physical world. We're way more like creative and capable than we give ourselves credit for. It just is kind of like natural. We make decisions like wake up in the morning, what to wear. Is it cold? Is it warm? We're kind of like constantly, programming for a successful outcome in the physical world. And as part of that, people are kind of reusing the functional, kind of properties of these physical objects to solve problems. One of my old silly examples was, imagine the window's open and papers are flying across the desk. I put my coffee cup on top of the papers to hold it down. It's like so simple and silly, but everybody does this probably hundreds of times per day. And it was that same type of interaction, this kind of almost like natural, creative reuse of how things worked, that was kind of the inspiration for it. It was, once you crossed over from a physical world to a digital world, you're basically have your hands tied unless you're an engineer or a programmer. And that there was something about that felt really kind of unfair. And that was kind of the initial problem that I started to, try to solve, is how do we build something that is programming, if this and that. It's kind of like the concept, but it's approachable to the point where people don't even think of it as, being, creative even. It's almost like, how do we make it so obvious and so kind of natural that someone just goes about their day and doesn't even pat themselves on the back for solving their own problem, because it's just kind of as natural as breathing in the same way they do it in the physical world.
And I would urge anyone listening to check out IFT website there. And there's that many different little automations that you can just set up within seconds. And it does exactly all the things you just said. And it's a great story behind it. And I'm curious, from when you had that idea and the problems that you wanted to solve, how do you then go from that point to build the company from the ground up to become one of the leading IoT solution platforms with $1 million revenues? Because it sounds very easy. And yes, it was a 10-year overnight success story, but what put you on that path and how did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started with passion for that kind of problem that I just described. I felt that the solution to that problem was really important, that it would, and this is kind of where post, save the world Silicon Valley, and we're kind of in, hopefully not destroy the world, but we're kind of coming to grips with, oh, geez, all this stuff we built really has a lot of impact, some of those kind of unforeseen consequences of, kind of moving fast and breaking things. But honestly, I think I still have that motivation, around the idea that what IFT is doing is good. We're not actually an individual product or service. We don't do anything without the support and the integrations with the hundreds of other services that we use, right? You can't really if this and that something without, Spotify or Shazam or Philips Hue, so on and so forth. And so in a way, we're kind of saying, can't we all just get along? One of our taglines is everything works better together. And so without getting too cheesy on it, like that the idea that we're doing something that is net positive, or at least we think it is for now, is one of those kind of driving factors that have helped us basically, go through the ups and downs of a decade in early startup mode. So, we were very lucky early on that had some friends that went to MIT. They kind of introduced the site in kind of a beta mode to some kind of message board. I can't even remember what it was with MIT. And so a lot of the first adopters, like the first couple hundred people, were like, super smart, super, super well-known computer nerds. And then as that kind of went through, kind of introduction on Hacker News and other things, I think that helped quite a bit from the get-go validate that this was something cool or good. And so there's kind of a lot of little steps like that where we've kind of lucked out in terms of getting publicity or getting something going. Because certainly it was my second time trying to do a company, quote unquote. The first one totally crashed and burned. And I wish I could say what the kind of magic ingredient or sauce was for the second one. But I kind of go back to just passion around it. Like I cared so much, especially when it was just me. And then, my brother joined up. He was sleeping on my couch at the time. So kind of, employee number 2 or 3 and a couple other buddies. And I was just so gung ho about it. I spent all day, every day thinking about it and working on it.
Love it. And I've watched from afar how many of these little automations have evolved over the years. So I'm curious, here in 2022, what are the most popular automations or recipes on IFT? Is there anything that stands out to you or anything off the top of your head?
One of our biggest problems, and I think also one of our biggest strengths, is that there's no like 1 or 2 use cases that just is head and shoulders above all the rest. There's some that are very popular, like you mentioned what you do with Spotify. Yeah, we have a lot of people kind of creating like a weekly playlist of the Spotify tracks. I think we have probably a couple million people doing that. So in terms of like individual use cases, there's a lot of people as a percentage of the overall user base doing something like that. Or another really popular one was some of the silly stuff between the social networks, being able to post your Instagram photo as an actual native Twitter photo when you take an Instagram photo, so like the Instagram Twitter world, they don't really want those photos showing up on Twitter as photos. They want them as links that take you to the Instagram site or app. So there's things like that are, have a couple million, there's probably some that probably have 5 or 6 million users doing them. But there's this huge medium to long tail. And that's kind of the stuff that I geek out about, the stuff that only, 10 or 20 or 30 people are doing, but they found something that is useful for them around services that they use. And even though we've built, I think, quite a reputation in the world of, Internet of Things, consumer kind of smart home, that's still roughly only about a fourth of what people are doing with IFT. And you can kind of think of that just by kind of numbers. There's a lot more people that have a Twitter account or an Instagram account than they do, $100 smart lights or something like that. So the barrier to even get started with that is a little bit higher. But we initially started not to be a smart home platform as much as I think the idea really made sense as more and more things started to come online. And that's kind of back to the original thesis, which was we have this creative confidence in the physical world that we take for granted. And very quickly, that physical world is being taken over by the digital world. Everything is going to be on the internet, right? Probably don't need another person on your podcast saying that, but it's true, right? Like, I think we can all accept that over a long enough time period, it feels like, barring any, natural catastrophe, the internet's going to continue to get more and more part of everything we do. And so that was one of the things I think led a lot of the smart home stuff to make a lot of sense with IF, because, hey, once you have a connected thermostat or a connected light bulb, you start to think, well, what else could I do with it? I can turn it on and off the app. So a lot of that smart home stuff is actually really sticky. The stories are very compelling, but it's still roughly only about a fourth overall of what people are doing with IF.
And you are all about connections. And I'd love to explore the art of the possible a little bit with you here. So if everything around us was connected, how would you say the future of connectivity and also its possible implications for humanity? Mm-hmm. What would the grand vision be around that?
I kind of go back to this idea that we have so much control and confidence in the physical world, right? We're not worried about our, shoes, stealing our information and giving it away to advertisers or something like that. Like it's almost silly to think. And so I think it starts with having that same confidence. If all of those things, including your shoes, are connected to the internet in some way, how do we instill confidence that people are ultimately in control? Mm. And so a small part of that is, being able to kind of automate that or connect it to other things. But I think there's a much bigger picture that we also want to be, continue to be a part of, is just the confidence that, that a user or a person knows what's being negotiated, what's being given up for this, digital future. And then what are some of those implications? How is that data used? And that's a problem that I actually think is making, positive progress. A big part of it even goes back to our shift in business models. We started off trying to build a business around charging the brands themselves. So the brands on IFT, Spotify, Philips Hue, Google Nest, so on and so forth. And we did okay there. We thought we were kind of on the typical startup enterprise software trajectory. I think we got about 5 million ARR, a couple hundred, big name customers. But it was just a slog because it was really hard. Google probably valued IFT very differently than Philips Hue, very differently than others. And it wasn't really a known quantity. They weren't buying seats of software, right? It's a lot easier for somebody to pony up to pay for Slack internally because they kind of multiply, $8 or $9 by how many employees they have. And they think, okay, all these employees are going to be empowered with this new tool. But what's happening, and I think I got a little bit astray there talking about IFT's business, but I think what's happening in the broader sense is people are now more willing to pay for things online. And whether that's paying for a subscription to a newsletter, paying for a subscription to some other type of digital service, finding people talk so long about like micro payments and microtransactions and all that stuff. I don't think there's really a buzzword there. It's basically just credit cards. I think things like Netflix kind of led the way to the idea that there were some things we paid for in a kind of less digital world of cable, and now we're willing to pay for those things in a much more digital world of Netflix and HBO Max. And so I think as that trend continues, what Twitter is trying to do now is they're basically saying, hey, this advertising thing isn't the future. We're going to get people to pay. Aside from all the other controversy, I think that's a much better and cleaner relationship between a business trying to create value for someone and a customer. The C word, right? Like the idea of actually having that direct relationship. And if that customer doesn't like what you're doing or finds out that you're doing something nefarious or something, then they can kind of vote with those dollars. It's not like capitalism is the end all be all, but the idea that the relationship is changed from something that's given away for free and someone else is really the customer to that direct relationship, I think creates more honest and better companies long term. So I'm very hopeful that trend continues. And I think people should hopefully, to some extent, it's ridiculous to think, I think I probably pay now twice as much as I ever did for basic cable, Netflix and everything else. So it's not something that's going to be solved in the next 1 or 2 years, but I think in the next 10, if more and more individuals are willing to pay for things online or pay for things on a recurring basis, they're going to have a better relationship and a more kind of honest and transparent relationship with those same services that used to give it away for free.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old saying that if you don't pay for the product, then you are the product. And I think there will be a movement away from that. And I'm curious, with so many connected devices and subscriptions, etc., do you think digital privacy is a bit of an illusion at the moment, or are we moving away from that as well with Web3 and the direction we're heading towards?
Then that's the P word, privacy. Yeah. I think privacy is one of those things that, again, like in the purely physical world is, I don't know if it's taken for granted, but it's understood in this like fundamental way, right? Like it's, if you don't want people to see you naked, then close your windows when you're changing clothes, right? Like it's kind of a silly example, but we're so just like naturally aware of what it means to be private or public in a purely physical context. If you don't want someone telling someone else, a bad secret about you or something you're embarrassed about, well, you shouldn't tell anybody, right? Like, and I think it sounds silly to even kind of give these as examples because they're so obvious, right? Like we don't need a definition for privacy in the physical world because we've been dealing with that as a, kind of human race for, thousands and thousands of years. So when we then try to graph that thing that we kind of don't really understand, but we like intuitively know how to deal with in the physical world to the digital world, I think it's just really slippery. It's hard to define. What is privacy? What choices am I making now that could lead to an outcome that is more or less private in the future? And I think those things, it's a little bit of a cliche to say it, but I think it takes time. We need to have that same kind of like intuitive grasp of what privacy means in the digital world that we currently enjoy and take for granted in the physical world. And so when you sign up to a new service and upload all your photos or give them access to your location, it's not clear to the person what they're actually, signing up for, right? Did they just tell a secret to their best friend, or did they just tell a secret to their worst enemy and they're going to go blab it all over, the school playground? And I think that will become clearer over time. And some of it is just kind of like learning with, the kind of pitfalls and sometimes, actually getting into situations where, your windows are open and you're changing clothes and everybody's watching. But hopefully that doesn't happen too often to too many people. And I think if you were to talk to, I don't even know the generation names anymore, but it's, basically, I think I'm a millennial and there's a Gen Z right before us, perhaps. Yeah. I'd say that they almost accept that their digital world is going to be more public, right? They're doing things now to ensure that in the future, there's not a moment where they're like, taking their entire Facebook profile offline, right? And I'm sure any millennial listening can appreciate that. It's like you started Facebook. I think I signed up for Facebook in college. 5 or 6 years later, trying to get a new job. Holy shit! Yeah, maybe blowing fire with rubbing alcohol out of my mouth as a video isn't going to sell my new employer. So let's delete all that. And so I think they're kind of going through a process where the people right ahead of them learn some of those things. Hey, don't post it on Facebook or don't post it on XYZ, whatever it is, if you're going to be embarrassed about this 5 or 10 years ago, or if you do post it there, post it in a way that they have more control over. So even just thinking about the kind of dumb mistakes we made as, 18 or 19-year-olds on Facebook when it was getting started, in the same type of behavior that Gen Z is doing now with TikTok and Snapchat and other things, they're so much more open and kind of open eyes, and they understand that relationship so much better than we did just 2 decades ago. And so I hope that continues with each generation. They're kind of learning from the mistakes that their parents or their older brothers and sisters made and starting to do some of the things that give them so much more confidence. Like right now, I don't have confidence to post photos publicly just because, one way or another, not that I have anything that bad out there. It's like, I kind of don't know. I'm starting to feel a little bit like my parents on the internet. It's like I've been burned so many times in the past that, I go in by default kind of skeptical. Hey, if I post this, what's going to happen? I don't know. Whereas I think Gen Z probably goes in saying, okay, well, this is going to be like Snapchat or TikTok, or, they're looking for different little signals, things that are almost, kind of either unspoken or that, older folks would totally miss, that give them that confidence to try new things out. Plus, if they haven't made some of those mistakes, they're hopefully not making the same ones, and they'll find a whole new way to make a mistake about privacy in their early 20s.
I must admit, as a Gen Xer, I am so relieved that all the things I did in my formative years are not out there right now. But
yeah, totally. I mean, there's so many conversations where I'm just like, I'm so thankful that Facebook started in college and not high school,
Yeah, 100%. Apologies for interrupting the interview, but this podcast is brought to you by Flipper, the #1 marketplace to buy and sell online businesses and startups. So my quick question to you is, do you own or run your own online business? And have you ever considered selling your site, your store, your tech, or your app? Well, with world-class combined matching technology, dedicated brokers, and end-to-end services, all at the most efficient price, Flipper makes selling your online business simple. So to get a free valuation, simply visit flipper.com/techtalks, where each month thousands of online business owners exit with Flipper. Again, to learn more, visit flipper.com/techtalks. But now back to the interview. Of course, we're recording this towards the end of 2022, and we're at that time of year where people are starting to reflect on this year's tech trends. And also there's a lot of futurists and analysts, etc., trying to predict what trends are going to dominate next year and the future. So I've got to ask, are there any top IoT trends that excite you that you think we might see next year or indeed in the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to be one of those people that thinks, that is so optimistic about the self-driving car. I live here in San Francisco in North Beach. I think it's Cruise and a couple others are now actually doing the driverless vehicle beta tests. I think you can only really kind of call for a ride between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. or something like that. But it's like here, you see people driving around and there's no one in the front seat steering wheel. Wow. And that to me, it's another connected device. And how that's really different, Uber is kind of already that. It's basically a car connected via the phone with a person in it. But I think things like that, when you think about it, it's just like every car is now, for sure a device. We've had connected cars for a really long time, but it becomes so much more kind of pervasive in such a kind of a different, experience to think that, every one of those cars that someone doesn't own that's on the road is now purely a device. There's no person necessarily behind it. And I think that's going to be really cool. I'm also very long on the idea of, let's call it AR, all these, AR, VR, something R. There's a reason that Facebook is okay with failing spectacularly, right? Because they're thinking on, a 10, 15 year time horizon. Their advertising business is going to probably do okay for the next decade, but after that, they're basically locked out of any of the platforms, the mobile platforms, other things. They're just an app. They're not the actual hardware. Yeah. So they want to be it. Apple wants to be that. Google wants to be that. And it's really only a matter of time. I don't know what the form factor will be or what the thing is. It's definitely not going to be Google Glass, anything that's goofy enough that people can make fun of it. But, I think, AirPods are pretty darn close. It's going to be something that's much more natural. And, we are still kind of coasting on the mobile phone revolution, right? The iPhone. I think, can't remember the exact year, but it was only a few years after college, 2007, 8, 9. Yeah. And to kind of think that the last decade and a half of what has made, so much change in the world and, the internet to have such a kind of all pervasive kind of view on, everything we do is connected. I think there's another wave like the phone around this idea of AR. And again, I can't predict what that looks like as much as I think everybody else, a lot of folks that are thinking on 10, 20 year horizons are thinking the same thing. And to me, it just is so natural to think that you go from, looking down at a device, it's such a, when you think about like social gestures, right? Like we're still very much rooted in the physical world. I kind of come back to this idea of physical and digital in almost everything I think about. The idea that so much of our society is now kind of in tune with what it means to be on your phone versus not on your phone, right? If you're looking down, kind of doing this, that means something, hopefully in a very polite way. People know to not bother somebody, or they're kind of like, they're like plugged into something and they're not plugged into the physical world in the way that they would be if they weren't looking down at their phone. And I think that is something that will be a thing of the past. We'll kind of look back to those days and almost hopefully in a slightly negative way, we'll think that, oh, geez, it was way worse. And this future of kind of being connected, but still being present with other people, with other things in the physical world will be so much better. So I'm also, an internal optimist, as you can tell. But I think this future of AR is going to be so much better than the kind of current future that we've built around the phone. It's kind of pulling us away from each other. It's so good to be connected to the internet, but it's also so good to be connected to other people. And if we can kind of bring those two things together, and people can have confidence with their privacy and how it works, and maybe IFT can help them connect it all together or kind of duct tape things together, then I still, like I said, I still think we're building a better future. But we're kind of dependent on that next wave, whatever AR is, to kind of save us from this current generation of heads down looking at our phones.
Completely with you. What a great vision that is. And if I was to ask you to look further into your virtual crystal ball, how do you see the future of human computer interaction, and what role do you see IFT playing in that future ideally?
I'm kind of like a futurist by default. I love to think about crazy future scenarios, and it almost can be a huge distraction when you're trying to build a profitable company here and now. Yeah. So it's to me, I think that whatever that future is, I think it's less about the phone. The phone becomes, if anything, is kind of like your tether. It stays in your pocket, but there's some other way in which you're interacting with it. And again, whether I think AirPods are probably the closest thing we have. 5-6 years ago, everybody was kind of hot to trot about voice, right? And you can see why. There's something so natural about that. You can kind of have a conversation with 2 or 3 different people at the same time and juggle back and forth and still be connected. You're almost like multitasking. Like there's something, if we could have figured that out, and I still think we may, but I think we just ran up into, and it's really hard to figure out, not just natural language processing, but how do you take all of those visual or physical cues that people use in conversation and inject those? It's like, my guess is it's like a quantum computing problem, right? Rather than a kind of straightforward CPU, problem. So it's I think that future, it's going to be hands-free. It'll be, something much more visual. I think some of the kind of like cyborg kind of stuff that, it's always a little scary, right? Because we just talked about how, as millennials, I'm still figuring out like what I can post online, right? And all of a sudden we're talking about, oh, okay, well, let's bring all that kind of uncertainty into the body, let's just connect it, all day, every day. So I'm skeptical of that, coming on really quickly, but there'll be like a tipping point. There'll be a moment in which it's approachable. It'll be something, I kind of always thought that you could figure out something that was almost more like a temporary tattoo, something where you're able to read biometric data or feedback, right? Like there's so much stuff. If you just like put something right here on your temple or something on your forehead, you could probably get so much input and output, just from, kind of measuring what someone is thinking about and how they're thinking. And you could probably get to the point where you can kind of make it intuitive and natural enough to kind of like think, buy an IFT Pro account or something like that, think whatever interaction you're doing. I think something like that where you feel, again, you're back to that physical metaphor, you're in control. You can rip that thing off any point in time. It's not something that's permanent, but it's still very intimate in that it's essentially reading your mind. So I think there's something there where goes back to the individual needing to feel like they're in control, right? Like, and I think that's part of what makes the phone work, is that you can take your phone and throw it in the ocean anytime you want. Probably don't do that very often, but right? But like, or you can kind of delete all your accounts or delete all your photos, right? Like you feel like you can hit the eject button still. I think that's starting to slip away from us a little bit. But whatever that future of AR and kind of interactivity and human computer interaction needs to look like, there needs to be an eject button for it to work. People need to feel like they're not committing themselves now and forever to this unknown future. They need to say, okay, I can try this out, but if things get scary or weird, I can throw it in the ocean. So I think that'll be an important aspect of it.
So much food for thought there. And we started the podcast today talking about your origin story, what put you on this path. And to end on a bit of a fun note here, I always ask my guests to share one of two things, either a book that they've enjoyed or that's important to them, or a song that we can add to our Spotify playlist. I've not been able to get an IFT automation to do that yet, but what would you leave us with and why?
Okay, so it's called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, and it's by David Graeber, Graeber, and David Wingrove, double Davids here. And it was so fascinating to me. Like if you read, it's kind of in the same vein as like Sapiens, Guns, Germs, and Steel, kind of like, long, broad, overarching kind of historical views, but also controversial. Like, hey, we've gotten this all wrong. And a big part of what they think we've gotten wrong is, as kind of the Europeans came over to North and South America and basically wiped out the native populations. A big part of what was lost and effectively suppressed is that so much of what we're just currently starting to kind of figure out from a social kind of economic structure point of view, like the agreements that make society work, were already alive and well and figured out in the Americas at that time. So, to give you a specific example, like there was I think it was I'm gonna butcher it. It was like the northeastern, Canada, New York, a number of the Native American tribes essentially had an agreement that looked just like NATO. You attack one, you attack us all, right? And so that led to this incredible lasting peace, thousands of years of peace in this region, because, whether you're a part of that 8 or 9 tribe group or not, it created such a high bar to create conflict that conflict never arose. Wow. And, I think I'm probably not doing it justice, but there's, hundreds of other little examples like that where what we call, hunter-gatherers, or, almost as if they were less sophisticated than we were, actually had governmental structures. I think part of it, we don't even call it government. We call it like the chief or, something like that. We have so many ways of kind of painting other people that we didn't fully understand in a negative light, that we miss the fact that they had figured out so much of what we're just starting to kind of figure out with how government should work, right? One of the things that I think, America, capital A, figured out was that if you have someone in elected office, you can't elect them for life, right? There's term limits in so many ways. With right now, I think one of the big exceptions we can see being a problem with the Supreme Court. But that was one of those things that the native people in the Americas also figured out. No one was, kind of chief for life. There was a lot of the tribes had structures in which there was a rotating leader, or a leader at different times and different moments, that didn't allow essentially tyranny to take root. And so I think that idea that, hey, there's actually something we can learn about how we make our future better, or how we plan for, better government or better society in the future, from people that really already figured it out in the past. And so I think it's like optimistic, but also very fascinating to think through something that we kind of gloss over as, almost, in such a negative context as, these savage people that didn't know anything. And that, in fact, they knew so much more than we probably do now about so many things. So yeah, highly recommended The Dawn of Everything.
Wow. Well, I'll get that book added to our Amazon wish list. It's something I'll be checking out as well. So much we covered today. So I'll also add links to the IFT website and how people can find out more information. But more than anything, just thank you for coming on here, talking about your origin story, what put you on this path, and how you're empowering everyone to do more with their favorite apps, smart devices, and helping them automate and integrate so that they can all work together seamlessly. I'm a big fan, have been for many years, but thank you for sharing the story behind that today.
Awesome, Neil. Thank you so much as well. Hope you have an awesome week. And thank you for having me on today.
Wow. I just loved hearing so much more about how he built this company from the ground up to become one of the leading IoT solution platforms with $1 million revenues. But if you're a user of IFT, I want you to share some of your best automations with me. There are so many there of things that you can automate, from Trello tips to boost your productivity, sharing photos automatically, to Discord, saving your favorite tweets in an Evernote book, automatically turning on your lights at sunset, adding songs from videos you like to a Spotify playlist, keeping your Facebook and Twitter profile pictures in sync. There's just so many, but I'd love to hear yours, because anyone can go on the website and see the top 100 different automations there. But as Linden said, it's those small, tiny ones, and in the niche areas, they're the ones that can be quite exciting. So please, I invite you all to share with me your favourite IFT integrations. Let me know what they are. You can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilCHughes. Send me a DM, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find over 2,200 different interviews. So keep those messages coming in. A big thank you to each and every one of you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.